Dr. Uma's podcast is a series of podcasts providing career advice, work-based tips and learning skills, helping you become a better doctor with a healthy work-life balance. These podcasts are in association with MRCPCH Speciality Courses, who specialise in courses in interview skills, application form writing and communication skills. Check it out on mrcpchspecialitycourses.co.uk. Hi, welcome to another episode of Dr. Uma's podcast. As you know, I'm Dr. Uma, and in this episode I want to talk about documentation. Fortunately, I'm not talking to you about this because something's happened to me, but this is something that has happened to other people. It is something that has come up in recent conversations, and I think it's really important that we need to highlight this. So in this video, or in this podcast, depending how you're listening, I'm going to talk about sort of why I'm talking about this and what you should be actually documenting. The reason why I'm talking about this is because if anything were to go wrong with your patient along their journey, even after they've been discharged, and they make a complaint, or for some reason an investigation is done and they're looking through the notes of this patient, what you document, and actually the reason I'm making this video is a lot of us don't document, and that's where problems occur. With a lack of documentation, there's no proof of what you did, or at least your account of what you did, what you saw, how you dealt with it. And so by default, really, the only person that's, making any sort of claim is the patient, the patient's family, or anyone else involved in the care. You don't really have a leg to stand on. And it really, this sort of thing got me thinking, because we're so busy in our job. We don't have enough people on the rota. There's not enough cover. We're covering multiple things, holding multiple bleeps. We're just so busy, and we're doing our best. We're working really hard. We're getting through our shift. We're doing the best for our patients. We're trying to help our colleagues, and we're trying to get things sorted out. So if you're seeing patients, you're seeing them, you're assessing them, you're making plans, but that isn't good enough. You really need to document, and and without doing so, there's no record that you did anything. And if it isn't documented, it never happened. And that's a really key thing you really need to take away, is that if you have not documented it, it did not happen. And so you got to get into the habit of putting some time aside to document, whether that's at the time or at the end of your shift. And sometimes we are just because we've got this thing, haven't we, that I want to look good, like competent. I want to look competent, that I go to handover and I don't hand over any jobs, or there's no one waiting to be seen because I'm really good, and people are going to say, oh wow, well done. But that's soon forgotten about, right? You're looking for the wrong sort of approval. What I would recommend you do, if you say, well, okay, my shift is going to come to an end, I'm going to put X amount of time, whether it's half an hour, 15 minutes, whatever it is, and I'm going to sit down and make sure I've documented everything I've done. So I saw that patient, let me document in their notes. I've made a plan, let me document. I've clerked someone in, let me make sure my documentation is, clear. That's really what's going to save you. Your account this character account that you'll come across. But I'm a really good doctor. Well, I work really hard and I do all these things and I make sure I don't have. That's not going to stand up in any sort of investigation, court, root analysis. Doesn't mean anything, because ultimately, if you've done something wrong, or you've been made to look as if you've done something wrong, that's all that's going to be discussed. So don't get yourself in that situation. That's where I would, sort of where I'm coming from with all of this. So make sure you've put time aside to document. Even if you've forgotten, come back and do it. You'll never regret it, but you'll always regret when something's happened to a patient, maybe a day later, and they'll look into it and say, oh, something could have been picked up at that point, but they don't know what happened at that point because you didn't write anything. So it's pretty much why I'm telling you as a warning, as someone who's gone through training, and I look back and say, you know what, that's one thing that is really important. And even when you go beyond, you become a consultant and you're working as a consultant, it's really important. So what are you going to document? Well, it really depends on the situation, doesn't it? If you clerk someone in, you assess you write your history, your clinical findings and your plan. If you're going to review someone on the ward, this is where people fall, that they've quickly gone and seen someone. Maybe they've gone to see a wheezer, someone that spiked the temperature, someone who looks a little bit unwell, and they've made a plan with the nurse, and they're speaking to the parents, family. Everyone's very happy, and they walk off to their, one of 20 jobs that still need to get sorted out. But you didn't document anything, and that could be the beginning of something that could end up becoming something bigger. So you've got to sort of write, well, what time did you see this patient? And again, you might think, well, that's common sense. But again, in a rush, you forget these things. So, when did you see this patient? Why did you see this patient? What was the concern? What was the reason for the bleed? What was the question from the family? So that's really important, because then it gives context that, well, I don't know about that problem because I was asked to review for this reason, whatever the scenario is. So why did you actually go see this patient? What was the current state? What had happened? So really sort of go thoroughly with that. What were the observations at that moment of your assessment? What examination did you do? What conversation did you have and with whom? What was said? What were the concerns of the family? What were the concerns of the nurses? And what did you say in response? Sometimes that's not always necessary, but it is something to think about. What was your plan? Even if you're clerking a patient and you say, I gave them safety net advice. What safety net advice did you give? What did you give? Because technically that could have been anything. So you've got to be very precise in that language. And why am I telling you to be very clear and critical of what you're saying? I'm going to tell you, when I was a pediatric reg, I went to a study day, and there was a whole study day about this, about the medical legal aspects of practicing. And as you become more senior, more of the responsibility falls on you. And we had this lawyer that came, who talked about medical legal cases. And I found this person really uncomfortable to listen to, because when they talked about cases, well, there was one thing they said. They were like, when I take on the case, I only take it on if I can win. I have to win. They had this obsession of winning. I guess that's the attitude you've got to have as a lawyer, right? Like, if I'm going to go to a lawyer to get legal help, I want someone that's got a, I'm going to win sort of attitude. I get that. But with that attitude, you are now, you've got someone who's going to analyze every word you said, try to put in context everything that had been going on. So if they find a kink in your armor, if they find a weakness somewhere, they're going to exploit it. And you really got to think about that for a second. So even with the best intentions and the work ethic you have, if you don't document, and you don't document clearly, you have no leg to stand on. And this person is really going to, pretty much have their way. And so you need to avoid that situation. Now, I'm not saying that this is the way, protect yourself, there's people out for you. No. Nor am I saying, that, I guess what I'm trying to sort of come across in all of this is that, it's not about trying to cover your tracks. It's about doing the right thing. And we are a profession. Unfortunately, the world of medicine is becoming more medical legal. A lot of our practices, the way we do things now, is very medical legal. And so this sort of behavior has to follow in line. So when I heard that, I remember, and this has never left me, this individual, that God forbid, if I ever end up in a situation where I'm going to have to go to court to give my account about something, they're really going to look at that. And even if you have serious SIs that occur on the ward, they look at the notes. They want to know what's what. And if they don't find anything written, they'll go as far back as look at who's on shift. And they will really overanalyze the situation. Or they might read someone else's account of what you did or what you said. But you didn't document anything. So you don't really have much of a say. And to be honest, I can't even remember what I had for lunch, 4 days ago. How are you going to remember what happened, what the observations were, what the exact conversation, what were the concerns 5-6 months ago? You're not. You're going to assume, but an assumption, that doesn't really have a leg to stand on. So be very clear in your documentation. Get in good habits, and don't put yourself in a situation you don't need to be in. Your life is already very stressful, and you're doing a fantastic job. You're working really hard. Yeah, you're being a good doctor, but this will put you in a vulnerable position unnecessarily. So don't worry about people thinking you're amazing because you didn't hand anything over. It's better for you to put a bit of time aside, whether you scatter that throughout the day and do it in a staggered approach, or whether you sit at the end of the day and say, I need to sit down and make sure I've documented everything. And while I say that, one last thing I'm going to say is, even when you have people documenting for you, you need to check what they wrote. And when I was a junior, I always wondered why the consultant on the reg would always read what I'd written on the ward round, or read what I'd documented when I had gone around with them, thinking, do they just think I'm incompetent? Do they not trust me? But the more senior I've become, the more I realise that you don't know what's documented. Maybe they've not caught the essence of what the situation is. Maybe they've not written the right things, so that if something like this were to happen, you've actually done all the right things, and it's been documented that you've done all the right things. So I just want you to think about that. Become a bit more aware of this and avoid that situation. So I hope you found this useful. I know it's a bit of a daunting thing to think about, but it is really important, and you don't need that headache in life. But anyway, thank you very much for listening. Take care.